Gather around, traveler. I'm glad you arrived, because tonight's story is about a titan even the gods obeyed. Themis, the silent power behind justice, prophecy, and fate. She watched Olympus rise, whispered truths through ancient oracles, and warned of destinies that shook the heavens. So settle in, as her tale flows in one smooth, unbroken voice. No noise, no interruptions, just pure myth drifting softly through time. If these stories bring you peace, subscribing means a new myth will find you here every night to guide you gently into sleep. Themis, the ancient goddess of divine law and order, stood at the very heart of the world's first understanding of what was just, proper, and right, not by mortal decision, but by the eternal customs set down by the gods. She was not just any deity. She was one of the original Titans, born from the union of the sky and the earth, the daughter of the vast heavens and the deep, nourishing land. Some said her father was Aether, the upper light of the heavens, but all agreed that Gaia, the earth, gave her form. From the beginning, Themis embodied the timeless laws that shaped the cosmos, not those made by men, but those rooted in sacred traditions passed down from the earliest times. Where mortals created rules that could change with power or preference, the principles that Themis upheld were unchangeable and eternal. She taught the world about balance and boundaries, about how to worship, how to host guests with reverence, how leaders should rule justly, and how mortals should live in harmony with the gods and one another. She gave voice to these ancient truths in the form of Themistes, sacred pronouncements that echoed the divine wisdom entrusted to her. Before any mortal court rose and before any lawgiver wrote a code, Themis had already whispered to the hearts of those who listened about justice, honor, and duty. She stood not only for morality, but for the very structure of civilization itself. At Delphi, long before Apollo claimed the sacred oracle, it was Themis who first spoke from the sacred rock, giving prophetic words that helped guide kings and city-states, laying down principles not just of fate, but of how to live with piety and foresight. She was also one of the first consorts of Zeus, the high god of the heavens, not merely his companion, but his counselor, seated beside his throne, advising him on matters no thunderbolt could settle, those of fairness, balance, and cosmic law. Their union bore divine children who each carried pieces of her nature. Among them were the Horae, the goddess of the seasons and natural order, Eunomia, who brought good order, Dike, who represented justice, and Irene, who signified peace. These beings shaped the rhythm of life, the flow of time, and the ideals of a well-governed world. From her also came the Moirai, the fates who spun, measured, and cut the threads of mortal lives, deciding the moment of every birth and death with no regard for wealth or power. In these children, Themis left her mark on all things mortal and divine, showing how life must follow a path set not by whim, but by wisdom. In sanctuaries across Greece, from Thebes to Olympia to Athens, people worshipped her as the spirit of order itself, often alongside the Fates and Horae. At Olympia, she shared her altar with the Horae, and at Thebes she had a sacred place with Zeus Agorius, the god of public gathering and justice, showing her connection not just to the divine realm, but also to the daily life of the people. In times of great decisions or disputes, assemblies look to her guidance. In Homer's poems, she appears not as a distant goddess, but as an active figure in the order of things, calling the gods to council at the command of Zeus and sitting peacefully beside Hera on Olympus, reminding even the immortals of their duties and their boundaries. Her presence was firm and graceful, a guiding hand that never forced but always showed the way. She did not scream for attention or carve her laws in stone. Instead, she flowed through tradition, through sacred rites, through the quiet voice in every heart that knows what is right. Themis also played a vital role in prophecy, said to have inherited the oracle at Delphi from Gaia before passing it on to Apollo. This lineage of wisdom showed how she bridged the primal earth with the youthful power of the sun god, keeping continuity in the sacred task of speaking truth. Even when she no longer held the oracle, her essence lingered in every prophecy, every question asked at the navel of the world. In myth, she was sometimes linked with other deities like Demeter, especially through their shared role in upholding law. Her children mirrored this connection, particularly in how they represented both the blooming of spring and the inevitability of death. Like Persephone, who walked between light and shadow, Themis stood between heaven and earth, bringing harmony where there could be conflict. Some tales even suggested that she was the mother of Prometheus, the firebringer, which, if true, would show how deeply her sense of justice ran, even in rebellion. For Prometheus defied Zeus not out of pride, but to give humanity the tools to survive, something Themis herself might have understood. In a distant cave by the river Eridanus, nymphs believed to be her daughters by. Zeus was said to dwell, hidden from the world yet part of its life and pulse. Even the cities and altars that bore her name knew that Themis was more than a goddess. She was a presence that demanded respect, not by fear but by truth. Her worship was quiet but enduring, not as loud as war gods or as dramatic as the tales of heroes, but ever present in the breath of justice, in the peace of an honest council, in the calm order of a well-governed land. Though ages passed and newer gods took up the thrones of Olympus, the memory of Themis stayed in every law that echoed her spirit, in every temple that remembered her grace, and in every life that sought to do what was right without reward. For in the stillness of her wisdom, the world found its shape, and in the laws that were never written but always known, Themis lived on, silent, eternal, and true. Themis, born of the earth and the sky, stood among the great Titanesses, one of the divine daughters brought into being when Gaia, the earth, lay with Ouranos, the sky. Her birth was not alone, for alongside her came others of equal majesty. Okeanos with his deep swirling currents, Koios, Krios, Hyperion, Iapetus, Theia with her radiant presence, Rhea the nurturing one, Mnemosyne the keeper of memory, gold-crowned Phoebe whose light gleamed like the moon, and lovely Thetis who bore the life-giving rivers. After them came Kronos, the youngest and most cunning. Among these primordial siblings, Themis shone with a quiet and unshakable authority. Her name meant the embodiment of what was established, the order that flowed not from rules written by men, but from the very bones of the world. As told in the oldest verses, she was Gaia's blossom, bright and dignified, carrying the celestial blood of Ouranos through her being. Even in the songs of the Orphic hymn writers, she was hailed as a noble spirit sprung from the earth herself, a young flower of cosmic wisdom and balance. Different poets and storytellers, writing across centuries, remembered her in various ways, but always with reverence. Some, like the tragic poet of Athens, recorded that after Gaia herself gave up the oracle at Delphi, it was Themis who took the sacred seat, becoming the voice of prophecy that echoed through the stone halls and sacred springs, guiding the early world with her divine foresight. This role passed down, for even the gods looked to Themis in times of uncertainty, and she stood close to the highest of them all, a counselor to Zeus, and in some tales, a guardian, and even a nurse to him in his infancy, when Rhea, his mother, gave the newborn god into the care of Themis and the gentle nymph Amalthea to protect him from his devouring father Kronos. In that tender role, Themis was more than law. She was care, quiet strength, and the shield of the future. Stories told how she nursed the infant Zeus alongside Amalthea, who kept a pet goat, a creature said to have nourished the god with its milk. Even in such nurturing, Themis preserved the path of destiny, protecting the one who would later sit at the center of the heavens. Ancient historians and mythographers preserved lists of the Titans, placing Themis firmly among the most important. Whether it was Hesiod, Apollodorus, or Diodorus, they agreed that she was one of the original 11 Titans, 6 brothers and 5 sisters, whose presence shaped the earliest days of the cosmos. Some authors, looking deeper into alternate traditions, believed the Titans were born not of Uranus and Gaia, but through other unions, such as a Curete and a goddess named Titaia. But even in these differing accounts, Themis remained a constant, always present, as one of the guiding forces of order and clarity in a world often ruled by chaos and strength. Others mentioned her name in passing, but with significance, such as the Roman mythographer Hyginus, who preserved in his preface a fragmentary list of primordial births: Oceanus, Themis, Tartarus, and Pontus, sprung from the joining of Coelum and Terra, names that mirrored Uranus and Gaia in Latin tongue. Though that list has gaps, and the records may have shifted in transcription, her place among the Titans is beyond doubt. Her essence, recorded in stone and song, shaped how the ancients understood the forces beyond their grasp. Some sources, such as the Scholia on Euripides, even noted that the Hesperides, those guardians of the golden apples, were born of Zeus and Themis, showing that her role in the divine order extended far beyond counsel and prophecy. Even the designs on ancient coins bore her likeness, not in a wild or destructive form, but calm and stately, with symbols of balance, a pair of scales in one hand and a cornucopia in the other, blending judgment and abundance. This form echoed that of Athena, yet with a different spirit, more serene, more eternal, like the slow, firm beat of a just heart. In Athens and other cities, altars stood in her name. Though she did not seek worship through fear or fire, people gave her honor alongside other divine figures of fate and harmony. She was not the storm, but the stillness after, not the sunburst, but the even light that made the world fair. And when the gods gathered in council, it was said that she, by command of Zeus, summoned them, for her voice had the authority of the cosmos behind it. From the high courts of Olympus to the stone sanctuaries of mortal cities, Themis stood as a quiet but unyielding figure. Her presence was not always loud in myths, but it was always near, always steady, woven into the very fabric of things that lasted. The oracles, the seasons, the laws unspoken, yet always known. Though her name meant custom and divine order, she was more than law. She was the rhythm of rightness, the sense of things being as they should be. And in every tale that remembered her, whether in fragments from the mouths of poets or in the careful records of historians, her figure rose as tall as any tower of Olympus, guiding not just gods, but the minds and hearts of those who looked for truth, not in force, but in the calm certainty that some things are just and always will be. Themis, who once cradled the infant Zeus in the early days, when the world was still shaping its order, became more than just a caretaker in the halls of Olympus. After the first consort, Metis, had given birth to Athena, Themis was chosen to become the next bride of Zeus. Their union was not one of mere affection, but a joining of purpose. For through Themis, divine law itself took root in the heavens and the earth. From this sacred bond were born 6 daughters, beings who would come to represent the foundation of both natural and moral order. First among these were the Horae, goddesses of the seasons, who brought with them the flow of time and the harmony of nature. Eunomia, the spirit of good order, guided society with calm regulation, ensuring that the rhythm of life followed a righteous path. Dike, the embodiment of justice, upheld fairness not only in mortal courts, but in the very balance of nature and divine will. Irene, the gentle force of peace, soothed the world with calmness and helped cities flourish without the noise of war. These 3 watched over the works of mortals, unseen but ever present, ensuring that those who lived justly thrived under their influence. Then came the Moirai, 3 powerful daughters who shaped the fates of all who walked the earth. Clotho, the spinner, drew out the threads of life, beginning each existence with a quiet motion. Lachesis measured those threads, deciding how long each life would last and what it would hold. Atropos, the most final of the 3, cut the threads with still hands, bringing life to its destined close. These daughters were not feared but honored, for through them life had meaning and destiny had direction. Even Zeus, the king of gods, gave them the highest honor, for their work was sacred and absolute. Poets and seers remembered their birth not as a casual tale, but as a moment when law and fate became real and lasting forces in the cosmos. In the verses of Hesiod, it was told plainly that after Metis, Zeus took Themis, and through her came these daughters, who watched over mortals and the mortal world, and in the odes of Pindar their names rang with clarity. Eunomia stood as the preserver of order, her noble name spoken alongside her sister Dike, the unsullied source of justice. Irene, too, of the same divine blood, guarded the wealth of mankind, for peace was the ground on which all abundance grew. These 3, radiant and true, were known as the stewards of human life, quiet and eternal. The poet spoke of Themis herself as wise in counsel, drawn up to Olympus by the Moirai in their golden chariot, along a gleaming path from the springs of Oceanus, where the edge of the world met the flow of fate. She was carried to the sacred stair of the gods, not as a visitor, but as a bride, the first true partner of Zeus, bringing with her the gifts of order and time. She bore the Horae crowned with gold and bearing the fruits of the world, and they in turn remained faithful to their sacred work. The writers of the age, like Apollodorus, confirmed this tale, saying that from Themis and Zeus came not just the Horae of peace, order, and justice, but also the 3 Moirai who governed life itself. These were no minor deities. They held sway over all lives, giving both good and evil to mortals in their measured ways. The journey of these daughters continued even into the stories of heroes. When the great traveller Heracles came to the river Eridanus, it was the daughters of Themis who showed him the way to the sea god, helping him along his destined path. Though they appeared only briefly in such stories, their presence marked the way as sacred, reminding all who heard that even the strongest heroes moved under the quiet guidance of fate. In Olympia, where statues stood in honor of the gods, the image of Themis sat beside that of Zeus and Hera, with her daughters beside her, seated on thrones, sculpted by ancient hands who remembered her not just as a goddess, but as a mother. The Horae were carved with care, their expressions serene, as they looked over the temple grounds, guardians not of war or storm, but of peace and stability. The presence of Themis there, her form immortalized beside her daughters, was a testament to the way she shaped the sacred order of divine and mortal life alike. Even the Roman mythographers remembered her name, recording that from Zeus and Themis were born the Horae. In these accounts, different names were sometimes given: Auxo, Foresaw, Carpo, Dice, Euporia, Orthosy, Thallo, and Augi, names reflecting aspects of life, of fruitfulness, light, and strength. Though the list varied, the spirit remained the same. These daughters were the ones who oversaw the smooth turning of the year, the blossoming of crops, the rhythm of human effort, and the reward of justice. They were many in name but united in purpose, and all traced back to the guidance of Themis. Her influence reached beyond thrones and temples, flowing into the very seasons, into the weaving of fate, and into the deep laws that governed existence itself. She was not loud but firm, not fearsome but enduring, and in the names of her daughters, whether sung by poets or carved in stone, her legacy remained fixed like the stars above, steady and shining across the generations of gods and mortals. Prometheus, the one who looked far ahead and defied the great power in the heavens, was sometimes said to be the son of Themis, the goddess of divine law and justice. In the old plays, in the deep words spoken on the stage of ancient theatres, this belief found a strong voice. It was told that Prometheus, the bringer of fire and wisdom to mankind, was born from Themis, the one who always gave wise counsel, whose name meant law not written by men, but shaped by the gods themselves. In one of the most powerful tragedies, it was said plainly, the lofty-minded Prometheus, son of Themis, who gave straight and fair counsel, stood defiant in his punishment, knowing right from wrong, not because he was told, but because he was born from the one who embodied divine fairness. In those lines, when Prometheus cried out to the heavens and to the light seen by all, he called upon his mother, his holy mother, calling her by name and calling her the firmament, the shining space that held the light of all. His words were not of complaint, but of pain carried with the strength of belief. Pain felt by one who knew that even the gods could act unjustly, even when justice had a voice in the shape of his own mother. In other versions, his mother was called by other names, like Gaia, the earth, but even then it was said she had many names and one form. Whether Gaia or Themis, the identity flowed into one meaning, the old and sacred wisdom that watched over both gods and mortals. And Themis, whose name meant the unspoken laws, was known not only as a mother to Prometheus, but as the very source of those laws that guided the world before laws were ever written down. She was the goddess of divine law, the invisible structure that kept the world in balance. She did not rule by sword or by throne, but by the quiet power of understanding, of knowing what must be done without being told. Themis was the one who spoke these laws, not from the lips of kings, but through the great oracle of Delphi, where her voice once echoed before it passed to the one who followed. There, in the place where mortals came to seek answers from the gods, it was first Themis who gave guidance, her words flowing from deep within the earth, not loud, but sure. Even in the old hymns, she was named as an ally of strength, standing beside the god of war, showing that victory without justice was hollow, and that true power came from law upheld with honor. Her presence was not just felt in one place. In cities like Aegina, surrounded by the sea, her name was spoken with reverence. There, throned beside the god of hospitality, she received worship, because the people knew that justice for the guest and fairness for the stranger were not just customs, but holy acts. In such places, the people believed that their city, though small, was made great not by walls or wealth, but by being a pillar of true justice, a place where Themis watched over every act. And in other cities, like Olympus, it was said that the city itself was a jewel in her crown, protected by her and by her daughters, Eunomia, who kept good order, Dike, who ensured justice, and Irene, who brought peace. These three, born from Themis and shaped by her wisdom, were not just symbols but living forces in the lives of men and gods. In the streets and temples of ancient cities, their names were spoken with hope, and their statues stood tall beside those of the mightiest gods. They were the ones who watched over every market, every court, every gathering. It was said that they were the stewards of wealth, not only of coin, but of harvest, of time, and of the joy that comes from living rightly. Their mother, Themis, was praised as the one who had given them their shape and purpose, and through them she continued to guide the lives of mortals. In songs and fragments of poetry, it was written that to live in the house of justice was to be blessed, and that those whose children chose to live with justice were the most fortunate of all. Themis was the guardian of such homes, watching over them not with a sword but with certainty. She was not loud, but her silence was full. She did not force, but her presence could not be denied. Even the great tragedies told of her as more than law. They spoke of her as protection. In the story of the maidens who fled across the sea in search of safety, they prayed not to warriors but to Themis, calling her the one who would look upon their suffering and ensure it would not bring harm. In that story, the king who listened to their pleas saw not his own house, but the hearth of law itself, and he knew that Themis was watching. She was the one who stood between fear and safety, who gave power to the powerless through her quiet command. She was divine law, unmoved by bribes, untouched by rage, constant in her vision. She was born of the old sky and deep earth, her roots ancient and her voice eternal. Her daughters walked among mortals in the form of seasons and justice and peace. But Themis herself remained ever above, ever present, a force that did not pass away, even when temples fell and names were forgotten. For as long as there was fairness, as long as there was right action taken without being asked, as long as one person helped another not for gain, but because it was good, there Themis would remain, unseen but known, silent but unbroken, the steady heart of divine law. If the state is stained by pollution that spreads among the people, it is not the burden of one man alone to fix what is broken, but rather it is for all citizens to come together, to unite in the effort to cleanse and restore what has been lost, to work with shared strength to heal the damage done to their shared life. But when the matter is grave, when the danger touches the very roots of the city, no one can speak with certainty until the matter has been placed before the whole people, before every citizen who holds a part of the city's fate. One man may sit upon the seat of power, but true justice rests in the hands of many. Yet there are times when the chorus, the voice of the people, or the sacred ones watching from the edge of human action, speaks louder than law itself. They declare that the one who rules is not separate from the people, not above them, but is their reflection, their breath, their voice. For he rules their altar, the fire of their homeland, and every choice made by his will becomes the fate of the land itself. He must not forget the danger of pollution, of wrong that is uncorrected, of injustice that festers. He must remember that there is one who sees all, who looks down from the heights, who watches the cries of the suffering, especially those who ask for justice and find none. That one, the protector of the weak and the forgotten, does not forget. His anger does not fade just because the cries go unheard by men. That wrath is slow, but it does not sleep. And so the warning comes. Beware the silence of justice delayed, for it becomes thunder when it breaks. In the voices that rise again, there is also defiance. The ones who suffer, the ones pressed into lives they did not choose, the ones who flee from the fate forced upon them, declare that they will not bow to laws that are false, to marriages that offend the soul, to power that does not listen. They do not run aimlessly. They steer by the stars, guided by justice itself. They ask for no favor, only fairness. They plead that judgment be given not by whim, but by the scales of what the gods have already made clear is right. Justice, they say, is on their side. The one who sees all, the high God, watches not with one eye but both, judging both the oppressed and the oppressor. With scales that do not tilt from bribe or fear, he gives to each their due. To those who have done wrong, he gives the weight of their deeds. To those who have lived rightly, he gives honor. And so, the chorus asks, if all is so balanced, why delay? Why hesitate to do what is right when the signs have already been given? In another place, in another fragment of ancient song, the truth is spoken again. Evil does not linger. It comes quickly to mortals, like a runner with swift feet, and punishment follows close behind for the one who breaks the law that cannot be broken, the law that is not written in books, but in the heart and the stars. Those who kick the table of the gods, who overturn what is sacred, who scorn the name of divine law, will not escape. Even if they hide, even if they lie, they are known. And so, divine law stands not just in the heavens but in the marketplace. In the wish for peace and prosperity, one must first give honor to Themis, the one who returns good for good, and who stands beside justice like a guardian lioness, quick to leap upon the wrongdoer. For justice does not sleep. She sees those who twist the commands of the gods, those who laugh at sacred laws, those who treat their elders with cruelty, who forget their ancestors and speak over the wisdom of the past. Justice remembers those who break the sacred rules of hospitality, who dishonor the table where strangers and kin once sat as equals under the eye of the gods. These things are not small, they weigh upon the world, and those who provoke such ancient forces will not go unnoticed. In the quiet spaces of the city, where peace is hoped for, where people walk and speak and live, these forces are present. Long ago, it was told that Themis was the first to teach humans the path toward the gods. She was not only the law, but the one who taught how to seek the gods properly, how to offer what was due, how to live in peace with the will of heaven. Through her came the knowledge of sacrifice, of sacred ritual, of awe for order. Through her, men were taught what it meant to obey not only the laws of men, but the deeper laws of the divine. And so those who kept the law, those who preserved what was holy, were called guardians of the law, those who watched over the sacred balance. They were not just judges, they were keepers of the way things must be. And when poets and storytellers spoke of the fall of cities and the fates of heroes, they remembered Themis. Her name came even in the cries of those who saw great wars, who watched mighty men fall. They spoke of her not as a fading idea, but as a living force, one whose absence brought ruin and whose return meant peace. Her image stood beside the sun itself, ruling not through light or heat, but through fairness and balance. And those who overturned her, who cast aside the sacred table, who stepped over the lines drawn by the gods, they found that the ground beneath them would not hold. In every word, in every warning, Themis was there, not with a sword, but with a gaze that never turned away, not with thunder, but with truth that would not move. For in the stories passed down through stone and song, there was always this, that the one who forgets Themis, who acts without justice, who breaks the unspoken laws of right and wrong, does not just harm others, they harm the world itself. And though the world may seem silent, though the gods may seem distant, that harm echoes, it grows, and in time it returns. That is the way it has always been. That is the way it will always be. Not good it is for those of lesser character to speak ill of kings, whether in whispers behind closed doors or openly before the public, for harsh and swift retribution waits for such words that carry shameless pride and disrespect toward those placed in positions of power. Above all, watching in silence but never unaware, sits Themis, the divine law, the unchanging spirit of justice and balance, and beside her moves Ard, the spirit of ruin and delusion, who brings woe upon those who act without honor. Together they weigh the words and deeds of mortals, and for those whose tongues wag carelessly, for those who mock sacred order and twist truth, punishment comes not by accident but by necessity. Themis, who never turns her face from the wrongdoing of the wicked, sees all with eyes that do not sleep, eyes that drift across the sky both day and night. No act escapes her, and none are hidden from her eternal gaze. She moves silently above the world, high in the air, crossing over all lands and peoples, never missing the guilt that stains those who stray from the path of right. She is not alone in this duty, for the will of the high God supports her, and together they work to ensure that sin does not go unanswered. In ancient songs and sacred invocations, she was honored as one of celestial birth, the shining daughter of earth and sky, a virgin in form and majestic in power. The hymns called her the bright blossom of earth, beautiful and radiant, and they remembered that it was from her alone that the first oracles were spoken to mankind. In the deep recesses of the sacred shrine at Delphi, before any other voice was heard, it was hers that spoke with clarity and truth. Her words rose from the heart of the earth, from the stone where the god's temple stood, and they were trusted by all. Later, that same power flowed into the god of light, whose oracles sprang from her will, for it was from Themis that he received the gift of prophecy. She was revered by all, her form bright and her wisdom boundless, a wandering light in the night, present where mysteries were revealed, and honored where holy rites were practiced. It was she who taught mortals the sacred rituals, who guided them in the performance of rites, and who took joy in the night choirs that sang for the god of wine and ecstasy. These mysteries, hidden from the common eye, were her delight, and she opened their paths for those who sought them with respect and piety. She was called upon with frankincense and sacred prayer, and those who invoked her asked for favor, for presents, and for a blessing upon the holy work they performed in her name. In another tale told in the epic verses of an ancient poet, Themis did not stand apart from the world but came close in the moment of birth. When a goddess struggled in labor in a city known for its wisdom and its courts of law, Themis came to her side, not with power or judgment, but with help. She became a midwife, the one who opened the path for life to enter, who eased the pains of labor, who lifted the burden and brought forth the child. She unwrapped the child from the womb. She eased the sharp pain, and she did so not with chants or charms, but with the laws of Solon in her hands, laws that symbolize balance, fairness, and wisdom. In that moment, divine law was not distant. It was intimate, shaping even the way life began, marking birth itself with the presence of order and justice. As the goddess leaned upon her, heavy with the weight of new life, The child was born upon the sacred book of the city's law, a sign that law and life were never truly apart. Themis, in her many roles, was not only divine law itself, but the very voice that advised the highest god, sitting at his side, sharing counsel, and whispering the truth of things that others might overlook. She saw the conduct of mortals, reported what was hidden, and made known what was buried. Her daughter, Justice, stood beside her, but it was Themis who guided the voice of heaven. She was not merely an observer. She was an active shaper of events, especially in times when great decisions had to be made. In the planning of the war that would change the world, it was not wrath or ambition that led the way, but a quiet conversation between the high god and Themis. They spoke together to set in motion the events that would unfold at Troy. It was a war born not of rage alone, but of a plan, an unfolding of divine will to cleanse the world of burdens too great to carry. And when the feast of the gods took place, when the marriage of a mortal and a goddess was celebrated, it was not simply joy that arrived. Strife also came, bearing a golden apple, and from this gift a quarrel began, one that would lead to war. And in those painted vases from ancient days, Themis is seen there too, present in the moment where peace slipped into chaos, witnessing the spark that would become a storm. Through all these stories, her presence is steady. She is not loud, but she is always near. She is the law that does not break, the voice that does not lie, the balance that does not tilt. She is found in temples and in homes, in rituals and in silence, in oracles and in judgments. She watches from above, she listens from below, and she holds in her hand the scale that weighs all things. She does not choose sides for pleasure or for wrath, but for truth. And those who forget her, who act against her, who mock her, do so at their peril. For she does not forget. She sees the hidden things, the secret actions, the quiet wrongs. She moves slowly, but she moves surely. And in the end, she arrives. Themis, the eternal law, the guide, the guardian, the watcher of all. Discord among the goddesses rose like smoke at the wedding feast of Peleus and the sea-born Thetis. For even in a hall full of joy, strife found a way to enter. There, standing quietly but powerfully, was Themis, divine law incarnate, present not to cause division, but to witness what would follow. And beside her stood Eris, the very embodiment of conflict, holding in her hand the golden apple that would soon bring the gods into a bitter contest. When the apple was cast and the judgment that followed led to the long and ruinous war of Troy, the finger of blame did not point to Themis, for she was the one who knew the laws beneath all events, not the one who stirred them. In later times, as thinkers and philosophers tried to make sense of the tales told by poets, they insisted that such chaos could not have been the doing of Themis and the great king of the gods. They rejected the idea that the law itself would cause discord, knowing that it was strife alone and not justice that pushed the story forward. Yet still, Themis remained close, watching, present in every divine gathering where decisions were weighed and outcomes shaped. She sat beside the King of Heaven himself, close enough to hear the quietest whisper, close enough to speak wisdom directly into his thoughts. He, the great seer of all things, the ruler above all others, leaned toward her, listening not to flattery, but to the voice of law and balance. In sacred hymns, it was sung that Zeus, highest among the gods, the fulfiller of destiny and guardian of oaths, spoke in quiet with Themis, the one who sat always beside him. Her place was not earned through force or fear, but through the strength of truth and the certainty of justice. At his side, she became his guide, his counselor, and his reminder that even the King of Gods must follow the laws laid down at the beginning of time. In the poetry of old, she was called Sotera, the Saviour, for she preserved not only the law, but the soul of things. She shared her throne with Zeus in the sacred role of host and guardian, making sure that guests were honoured and that none were wronged at the sacred hearth. Her power was not in weapons or armies, but in stopping that which must not happen. When bold hands reached toward the sacred, when men dared to steal honey from the cave where the child of heaven had been hidden, the ruler of the skies prepared to strike with thunder and flame. But Themis, with the fates at her side, stood before him and held back his wrath, for death had no place in that holy place. To shed blood, there would have been impiety, and she reminded even Zeus that some acts, even in anger, must not be done. So instead, he turned the thieves into birds, sparing their lives but marking their error for all time. In this, she showed the divine law was not only about punishment, but about mercy guided by rightness, about knowing when to act and when to hold back. Yet those who are wicked, who walk in full knowledge of their wrongdoing, never escape her gaze. Her eyes, ever open, move through the sky above all lands, never missing a single deed. With the support of the king above, she watches, not out of vengeance, but to protect the balance of the world. She waits for the moment when judgment must fall, and then she acts not with fury, but with clarity. The one who defies Themis may seem to escape for a while, but time does not hide guilt, and law never forgets. Even the immortals fear what follows when she is ignored. When the gods themselves broke into fighting, when the two sides argued over the fate of Troy and the strange gift of the wooden horse, they defied the command of their king. He roared across the heavens, his lightning burning the sky from east to west, his anger shaking even the strongest of the gods. The thunder fell like hammers, the lightning crashed without pause, and all the immortals, though deathless, trembled as fear swept through them. But Themis, who had taken no side, who stood apart from the quarrel, descended like thought from the clouds. She moved faster than any wind, arriving not with fire but with words that could not be denied. She stood between the warring gods and told them to stop, not for the sake of peace alone, but because they had forgotten themselves. She reminded them that it was wrong to fight over mortals who were born and died like leaves in the wind, and that their war would bring ruin not to men, but to themselves. If they did not listen, the mountains would be torn from the earth, their children would be buried, and even they, the undying, would be trapped in endless darkness. Her voice cut through their rage, and because they feared the words she spoke, they stopped. They let go of their anger and returned to harmony, not because they were forced, but because the truth had been spoken. She did not fight, but her presence ended battles. She did not strike, but her words broke weapons. She was not part of the quarrel, but without her, it would never have ended. This was the strength of Themis, the ability to change the course of gods and men with the power of law that all recognize, whether mortal or immortal. And so, she became more than a symbol, more than a voice. She became the keeper of assemblies, the one who brought together those who must decide, who created the space for justice to be heard. Wherever gods gathered, wherever decisions were made, Themis was there. She was the stillness before the verdict, the calm before the ruling, the breath before truth was spoken. She held together the world not with chains, but with understanding, not with threats, but with balance. And though her name may be whispered in reverence or passed over in fear, she remains, always present, always watching, always guiding all things back to what is right. Themis was the goddess of assemblies, a divine figure whose role in the order of the cosmos extended beyond the quiet force of law into the very heart of how gods and men came together to speak, decide, and share. She was more than a presence in the background. She was the one who made sure that gatherings had meaning, that speeches had weight, and that justice was not only heard but observed. In the heavenly realms, where the immortals dwelled high upon the peaks of the sacred mountain, it was Themis who moved quietly but powerfully through the halls of cloud and stone, calling forth the gods to hear the will of the king. When Zeus wished to speak, it was she who summoned the others to listen. From the many-folded peak of the mountain, she was sent, and she did not linger. She called to every divine being, to the spirits of the rivers, the nymphs of groves and springs, to those who danced in the grasses of the meadows, and to those who lived in the depths of nature. None ignored her voice, for her summons was law, and her words carried the gravity of necessity. All came, all took their places, gathering in the great house of the high god, built with skill and care by the divine craftsman, a place of polished stone and perfect symmetry, where decisions were made and fate was shared. Even in moments of tension, when power struggled with will, Themis stood firm. When the queen of the gods, having fled from the wrath of her husband, returned in haste and fear to the hall of the immortals, the others rose to meet her, raising their cups in greeting. But Themis was the first to speak. She did not question with scorn but with concern, her voice gentle but clear, recognizing fear, yet reminding the queen of her place and purpose. Hera replied with weary truth, revealing that even among the immortals, Themis was known to understand the stormy heart of the ruler. And even then, Themis was told to preside over the feast, to guide the fair division of the offerings laid out upon the divine table. For it was she who ensured that all received their portion as was proper, not out of favor, but out of balance. Her presence at the table was not ceremonial, it was essential. Without her, even celebration could turn into discord. At the great wedding of Peleus and the sea-born goddess, when all the gods came together in joy, it was Themis who set the silver tables, laughing with ease, bringing grace to the event, placing each piece with purpose, showing that joy too must follow order, and that even happiness must be measured with fairness. But her role was not only among the gods. Among mortals too, her name was spoken with reverence whenever people gathered to speak of law or to share a sacred meal. In the earthly assemblies, where kings and common men met beneath the sky to listen and judge, Themis was the unseen force that held the gathering together. In the old songs, when men raised their voices in complaint or demand, they appealed not only to the ruler of heaven, but to Themis, who convened councils and dissolved them. She was the invisible thread that connected every voice to meaning, that gave structure to the speech of kings and fairness to the cries of the people. When sacrifices were made, when feasts were held in honor of the divine, it was Themis who guided the division, who watched over the portioning of the sacred meal, making sure that what was offered was distributed rightly, so that no one took more than their due and nothing was wasted or defiled. Her hands did not serve the food, but her law shaped how it was served. She stood behind every act of gathering, every assembly under the open sky, every time men met to speak of justice or to honor the gods. Her influence stretched from the shining halls of Olympus to the simple gathering places of mortals. She did not shout, but her presence could not be ignored. She was not a judge seated high, but the very law that made judgment possible. When a young man, standing before his elders and peers, raised his voice to defend his father's house, He called not just on the name of the ruler of Olympus, but on Themis, for she was the one who gave the council its shape, who made the assembly more than a crowd. Without her, there would be no order, no fairness, no respect for the process of speech and decision. With her, even the most difficult matters could be heard in calm and judged in truth. She did not take sides. She did not push for one outcome or another. Her purpose was not to decide, but to hold the space in which decisions could be made. She was the foundation of the assembly, the structure of the feast, the silent authority that made each voice matter and each offering sacred. Her law was not shouted, but known. Her will was not forced, but followed. She did not sit at the head of the table, but every place at the table was set by her hand. She moved quietly through divine halls and mortal courts alike, ensuring that wherever people gathered in the name of justice or worship, the gathering had meaning, and the words spoken were heard in truth. Without her, there would be noise, but no assembly, food, but no feast, speeches, but no judgment. But with her, there was harmony. With her, there was order. With her, there was justice, not as punishment, but as presence. And so, in the halls of heaven and in the fields of men, Themis remained, the ever-present guide of assemblies and feasts, the unseen keeper of balance, the quiet force that gave the world its structure and its peace. Themis was present at the birth of Apollo, not simply as a witness, but as a divine nurturer and keeper of prophecy, fulfilling her role as the goddess of law and oracles. When Leto, heavy with child, endured long and painful labor for 9 days and 9 nights, surrounded by the greatest goddesses, Themis stood among them, calm and knowing, her presence steady through the suffering. Alongside others, she waited as the child of light and music was about to enter the world. Then, at the moment of birth, when Apollo leaped forth into the light, it was not chaos or confusion that followed, but order and celebration. The goddesses raised a cry of joy, and with ritual grace they cleansed the newborn in sweet water, wrapped him in fine cloth and adorned him with gold. But Leto, though she had borne him, did not nurse him. Instead, it was Themis who, with her own hands, poured the nectar and ambrosia, the food of the immortals, into the mouth of the divine child. It was not an ordinary act of care. It was a passing of divine authority, of purpose, of future vision. As she fed him, it was known that he would later receive the oracle of Delphi, the sacred place where she once spoke, where her voice once rose from the stone at the center of the earth, and where truth had always found a home. Themis, known not only for law but for foresight, once ruled over the oracles that revealed the will of the divine. Long before Apollo was linked to the sacred site of Delphi, it was Themis who gave answers from its deep and sacred halls. She did not take the oracle by force, nor was it taken from her by deceit. She passed it on willingly, through her consent, to others in her divine line. In sacred hymns and odes, her name was honored alongside the stone that marked the center of the world, the place where God spoke through signs and mortals came seeking truth. When daughters of divine harmony were summoned to sing, it was to praise not only Apollo but also Themis, whose words were never false, whose seat of prophecy stood high in the regard of all. The stories told by priests and poets remembered that before the god of music held the oracle, it was Gaia, the earth, who first spoke, and then came Themis, who continued the gift of insight. Then, in her time, she allowed another to sit where she had once sat, passing it along like a sacred flame, not taken, but given. This new bearer, in turn, gave it to Apollo as a gift, and through him, the voice of prophecy continued. Even as she stepped aside, her presence remained. The stone was still warmed by the memory of her voice, and those who came to hear the oracle spoke her name in reverence. The priestess, who gave the words, known as the Pythia, began her prayer not with the name of Apollo, but with the name of Earth, and then Themis, for they were the roots of the voice she carried. In another tale, it was said that Apollo came to claim the oracle while it was still under the guardianship of Themis. At that time, a great serpent called Python guarded the place, keeping others away. But when the young god approached, the serpent tried to block his path, and so he struck it down. From that moment forward, the oracle became his, but its foundation, its earliest voice, was always Themis. She had been the one to first make the stone speak, to shape silence into meaning, to allow men to hear the future not in chaos, but in the structure of words and symbols. Her gift was not noise but clarity, not fire but light. Themis was remembered not only for her role at Delphi, but for bringing the sacred act of divination into the world, for teaching mortals the rites by which they could connect with the gods. She introduced the first sacrifices, the offerings that opened the path between heaven and earth, and in doing so, she showed mankind how to walk the line between what was mortal and what was eternal. She did not scream her teachings, but showed them in structure, in ritual, in signs that were always clear to those who listened with care. Through her, the voice of the divine became part of the earth itself, rising from sacred places to answer those in need, to guide those who stood at the edge of choice, to calm those who feared the unknown. Even as time passed and other gods came to hold the symbols of prophecy, her name endured. Her wisdom was not washed away by time, nor her place forgotten. She remained as the foundation beneath each new voice, the breath behind every uttered vision. Whether feeding the infant god or guiding the hands of a priestess, she was there, always present, always the same. Her power did not need thunder to be heard, for truth does not shout, it stands. It was Themis who first gave structure to the unseen, who made the future speak through order, who allowed mortals and immortals to share in the clarity of divine will. And as the gods gathered, and the stars moved, and temples rose and fell, she remained the steady core of all prophecy, the eternal presence beneath every spoken word of fate. Themis, known as the goddess of divine law, was also remembered as the one who introduced sacred ordinances concerning the gods and taught mortals the path of obedience to laws and the ways of peace. Her influence was not only felt in the heavens, but deep in the lives of mortals, where she shaped how people honored the divine and respected each other through custom, justice, and worship. Because of her, those who guarded the laws, both divine and mortal, were given names that marked their sacred duty. Law guardians, those who upheld what was holy, and lawgivers, those who spoke the will of the gods into the world. Even the god of prophecy, when he stood at the center of his shrine to deliver words that shaped destiny, was said to be issuing ordinances, a word that reached back to Themis herself. For it was she who first gave shape to oracular responses, who first turned silence into meaning, and who first made prophecy a gift passed from the divine to mortals. Ancient thinkers believed that this power did not appear suddenly, but was crafted with intention. Some said that the god of prophecy, with the guidance of Themis, helped shape the oracle of Delphi, not for conquest or glory, but to assist humanity, to guide them through a world of uncertainty, with words drawn from a place deeper than thought. Stories grew around Delphi, each layer adding to the mystery, each version offering a different path to the same truth. that the voice of the gods once rose from that sacred place, and that Themis had stood at the heart of it. Some said that at the beginning, the oracle belonged to Earth herself, who gave the gift of speech to one of the nymphs of the mountains. In the lines of ancient verse, Earth and the god of the sea shared the shrine, Earth speaking her truth directly, while the sea god used a servant to share his will. Over time, Earth gave her share to Themis, passing the voice of the world into her keeping. Themis, in turn, gave the oracle as a gift to the god of light and prophecy, who then became its most famous keeper. It is said that, in exchange, he gave up an island to the sea god, trading the space for speech, realm for voice, so that all would remain in balance. In sacred hymns, Themis was honored as the first to make prophecy known to men, speaking from the hidden places within the shrine, where her wisdom rose like breath from the stone. The god of prophecy did not speak alone. His words flowed from the power of Themis, and from her his inspiration began. She was not a shadow behind him, but the light that made his voice true. And Themis did not speak only in private whispers or to chosen priests. In the old tragedies, it was told that she gave great prophecies, words that shaped the fate of gods and powers. When a mighty being tried to warn his fellow Titans, he remembered the words of his mother, Themis, who was also Earth, for she had many names but only one form. She had spoken to them, warning that strength alone would not be enough, that force without wisdom would fail. But the Titans, proud and unwilling to listen, rejected the counsel she had given. They chose to believe that they could win by might, that no trick or plan could stop them. Yet Themis had already spoken of their fall, and her prophecy was clear. What she had seen would come to pass, not because she wished it, but because truth could not be bent by pride. Those who did not listen to her words found themselves caught in the fate she had foretold. In these stories and others, Themis stood not only as a figure of law, but as the very breath of prophecy itself. She shaped the world through words, not commands. She brought clarity where there was confusion, not through force, but through insight. Her voice was the voice of the earth, the sound of something deeper than time, older than gods, and stronger than pride. She guided through balance, not power. She gave law not as punishment, but as path. And in all the shrines where mortals came seeking answers, her presence lingered, steady and silent, in the space between question and reply. The shrine of Delphi, with its stone that marked the center of the world, was her throne before it belonged to any other. The god who now spoke from it did so because she had allowed him to, because she had trusted him with the voice that once was hers. Though many names were remembered, and many voices rose from many mouths, the first was Themis. She gave the shape to prophecy. She set the foundation of law. She made oracles possible. And when mortals look up to the heavens for guidance, when they gather in silence before the stone where breath once turned to speech, it is still her truth they seek. For though others now speak, the source remains. The voice of law, the voice of balance, the voice of Themis, foretold to me the way in which the future was fated to come to pass. My mother, who was called Themis, though she was also known as Gaia, for both names belonged to the same deep, ancient power that shaped the world with law and truth. She made clear that it was not by brute strength, nor through acts of raw violence, that the ones destined to rule would achieve their place above others. Rather, it was by cunning, by wisdom, and by subtle paths that victory would be won. The outcome was already written, set not by chance, but by the long-reaching thread of fate, which no force could sever and no pride could bend. And even though I tried to make this known, Even though I offered this truth to those who stood tall with the confidence of Titans, they would not listen. I argued, I reasoned, I spoke clearly, but they ignored me. They were too proud, too certain in their own power, unwilling to believe that their strength was not enough. They looked only to what they could break, to what they could command, and they believed that nothing beyond force was needed. But I had been taught differently, not by guesses or dreams, but by the voice of Themis herself, who had seen what must come and who had told it not in riddles, but in clear words. She had spoken of the fall before it happened, and her words were not only about the Titans. She had also given voice to another prophecy, one that changed the very order of desire among the gods. There was a time when two great powers, rulers of sky and sea, both looked upon the sea goddess Thetis and wished to take her as their bride. Each of them, moved by passion and drawn by her beauty, longed to make her theirs. But before such a union could be made, the voice of fate intervened, for Themis rose among them and gave a prophecy that no one could ignore. She said that if Thetis were to bear a child by one of the gods, that child would grow to become stronger than his father. He would be greater in power, unmatched in strength, and none could stand before him. His hand would release a force more terrible than the thunderbolt, more fearsome than the trident, and none would escape his might. This child, if born to a god, would overturn the balance, for his strength would surpass the very tools of divine rule. And so, Themis warned them to turn away from their desire. She told them not to pursue the sea goddess, not to let passion blind their judgment. Instead, she said, "Let her wed a mortal. Let her give birth to a son who would shine brightly, but only for a short time. That way, the strength of the child would remain in the mortal world, and he would live a glorious life, swift and brilliant like the flash of lightning, but he would not rise to challenge the heavens." She spoke of a mortal man who should be chosen, a man named Peleus, one known for his righteousness, a man who lived humbly upon the plain, not among the stars, but among men. It was to him, Themis declared, that Thetis should be given in marriage. And so the gods agreed. They listened and they obeyed. With a nod of their immortal heads, they accepted the words of prophecy, and they did not try to bend fate. They joined together to honor the wedding not of a god and a goddess, but of a mortal and an immortal, knowing it was the wiser path. The marriage was not a loss but a gift to balance the world. Themis had not only spoken, but shaped the course of divine will. She told them when it must be done. She told them not to argue, not to quarrel, and not to let the decision be delayed. She said it should happen on the eve of the full moon, that the sea goddess should release the girdle of her maidenhood, and the union should be sealed not in defiance, but in honor. In this way, a child would be born who would burn like fire in the world of men, a warrior like no other, destined to shine for a moment as no man ever had, and then vanish, consumed by the fate that all mortals must face. Others remembered the same truth. Some said that the sea goddess was already carrying the child of the ruler of heaven, but the prophecy caused her to be given to a mortal instead. It was not cruelty, but wisdom. It was not a mistake, but the path that was needed. Whether spoken by the firebringer or by divine law itself, the message was clear. The child must not be born to a god. The prophecy did not whisper, it spoke with strength. And those who heard it chose not to challenge it. They did not test its truth, for they knew that the words of Themis were never wrong. They had seen before what happened when her voice was ignored. The pride of the strong had already been broken once, and they would not let it happen again. Themis had spoken again and again, not in anger, but with calm certainty. Her words were not born from emotion, but from knowledge that reached deeper than any sea, higher than any sky. She did not raise her voice, but her truth was louder than thunder. Her prophecy shaped more than lives. It shaped the fate of gods. And in that moment, when passion gave way to wisdom, when desire bowed to justice, her voice was heard clearly, and the world shifted on its course. The marriage of Thetis and Peleus was not a celebration of love alone, but a sign of obedience to law, to balance, and to the order that holds the world together. Themis had spoken, and the gods had listened, and through her words, the son of the sea goddess was born not to rule the heavens, but to burn like the sun upon the earth, shining bright, living fast, and leaving behind a name that would never be forgotten. Me, that not brute strength, not violence, but cunning must give victory to the rulers of the future, was the wisdom passed down not through sudden insight, but by the steady voice of my mother, who is called Themis, the embodiment of divine law, of balance, of justice that did not rely on the force of arms, but on the clarity of mind and the foresight of law that governed even the gods. This I explained to them with reasons that were full of truth, shaped not from desire but from the understanding of how fate worked its path through time. But they, proud in their confidence, full of their strength, found these words unworthy of even a moment's attention. They dismissed the idea that wisdom could overcome might. They believed in the roar of power, in the weight of muscle, in the loudness of control. So they ignored me. And among the paths that lay open before me, I chose the one that would not be easy, but would be right. I stood beside Zeus, with the blessing of my mother, and I gave him the counsel that brought about the downfall of the old regime. Through that counsel, the Ancient One, the Father of gods, the one who had ruled before, and all his followers, were cast into the abyss, into the deep blackness of Tartaros where time forgets and light cannot reach. They had not listened to Themis, and so they fell when the sea goddess was desired by the rulers of sky and sea. Both wanting her for a bride, the desire could not be fulfilled, not because it lacked strength or intention, but because Themis once again gave voice to the deeper truth. She foretold that the child born to that goddess would be stronger than the one who fathered him. That prophecy was not just a warning, it was a command that could not be broken. And so those who had wished for her turned away, not with joy, but with acceptance. For Themis had spoken, and her words left no space for pride. Even the king of the gods, though he continued to gaze upon her with longing, did not act against the prophecy. He gave her up, not because his desire had faded, but because the truth had been spoken, and it could not be undone. The prophecy of my release was also hers. When I, bound and silent, endured the punishment laid upon me, it was she who whispered of the future that would come. She told of one who would be born from a line long distant, a hero known for his courage and skill, who would come with a bow in hand and break the chains that held me. She spoke not of hope, but of certainty. From the daughter of a line begun with Io, there would rise one who would end my torment. These were not vague dreams, but a vision passed from law itself, from the Titan mother whose sight reached beyond the horizon of gods. And it was again her words that warned of the theft that would one day come to a far-off garden, where golden fruit hung in sacred branches. The one who kept that place, who feared the loss of what had been given to guard, remembered the words Themis had spoken, that one day a son of the king of gods would come, and he would take from the tree what was not meant to be touched by mortal hand. Fearing the truth of that prophecy, the guardian raised great walls and placed a serpent to watch with never closing eyes. But still the prophecy stood, and fear could not change what was destined. She was present too when the world had drowned, when the waters had swallowed the land, and only two remained. They stood upon a mountain high above the clouds, the only place left untouched, and they gave thanks not just to the spirits of stone and stream, but to the one who still held the oracle, who still spoke through the hidden shrine, the one called Themis. They cried for the world that had vanished, and together they went to seek her voice, hoping that she would guide them in a world without people. They found the stream not yet clear, but flowing as it once had, and there they prepared themselves, not for answers shaped by hope, but for truth that would shape what came next. In all these moments, she did not act with force, did not strike with weapon or fire. Her strength was her word, and her word was law. She gave voice to what would come, not because she wished it, but because she saw it. She did not change the course of time, but revealed it. She did not command. It was enough that she spoke. Her prophecies were not like the riddles of others. They were precise, unshifting, spoken with the clarity of law and the depth of the earth itself. She knew what strength would fail and what cunning would win. She knew who would fall and who would rise. She knew where danger would come and where salvation would appear. And all who heard her, whether they listened or not, were marked by the truth of her voice. Some ignored her and were lost. Others obeyed and were saved. But none escaped the reach of her words. Themis, the one whose sight was law, whose voice was the foundation of fate, spoke once and forever, and the world moved in the shape of what she said. There, in ritual dew with holy water sprinkling their heads and clothes, they turned their steps towards the holy shrine, though the signs of ruin and divine silence were heavy upon it, for a pale scum fouled its roofs, and the altars stood without flame, cold and deserted, as if the gods themselves had turned away in grief. And yet still they climbed the temple steps, slow and full of sorrow, and once they reached the sacred place, they did not speak loudly or raise their hands in defiance, but fell prostrate in reverence, and with timid lips they kissed the cold, wet stone, as if their touch could awaken the presence that once lived there. Their hearts were broken, and their voices carried only hope, fragile and small as they cried, not with demands but with humility, saying, "If righteous prayers may move and soften the powers divine, if the gods can still be turned by the cries of mortals, if their anger can be softened by grief, then speak, holy Themis, and show us the path by which our lost race may live again. In your mercy, tell us how a world submerged and broken may be restored." And Themis, though silent for long, at last was moved to pity. She gave her answer, not in thunder or flame, but in simple words that held the full weight of mystery and truth. She said, "Leave my temple, veil your heads, loosen your robes, and cast behind you your great mother's bones." These were the words she gave, and then there was silence again. Long they waited, confused by what they had heard, for the command was wrapped in a riddle, and its meaning was hidden beneath layers of reverence and fear. Hera, trembling, was the first to break the silence, not with certainty, but with refusal, for she could not bring herself to obey what she believed would be a violence against her mother's ghost. She wept and asked forgiveness, not willing to scatter what she thought were the bones of those who had given them life. And both searched the meaning, turning the goddess's words again and again in their minds, hoping to find clarity. Then Deucalion, her husband, looked deeper, and with quiet calm, he spoke what his heart told him must be the truth. He said that the gods would never command a crime, and that the words must be symbolic, not literal. He reasoned that since the earth is our great mother, then surely the stones buried within her are the bones she meant. These, and not the remains of the dead, were to be cast behind them. And as he explained this, hope returned to Pyrrha's heart, though fear still lingered. They decided to try. There was no harm in obedience, and perhaps the act itself, even if misunderstood, would bring some grace. So they left the temple as they had been told. They veiled their heads, loosened their garments, and began to throw the stones behind them, one by one, past their footprints into the earth. What followed was a miracle, quiet and slow, but wondrous. The stones began to change. Their hardness softened. The cold, unyielding shapes lost their rigidity, and gradually, with the mystery of divine power, they began to take on the likeness of living things. First, the shapes were crude, barely more than the suggestion of form, like rough marble, still unworked by the sculptor's hand. But then, details began to appear. Limbs, faces, the curve of a spine, the shape of eyes not yet open. The parts that were damp and heavy became flesh, and the parts that were solid and unbending turned to bone. Veins, once lines in stone, remained as veins beneath the surface. From the stones thrown by Deucalion came men, and from those cast by Pyrrha came women. And so a new race was born, not from womb or blood, but from the patient hand of the earth and the quiet voice of Themis. These new people were strong, but not delicate. They came from stone, and their hearts carried something of that weight. They were children of the earth, and they were not born into ease. Their strength was not just in body, but in the endurance they inherited from the rocks that once lay silent beneath the earth. In their labor, in their sweat, in their perseverance, they proved their origin. They lived with the memory of the flood behind them, and the story of the stones that became flesh was passed on, not as myth, but as the truth of who they were. And elsewhere, the memory of Themis endured. In a distant land, a city in the hills was named for her. They said she arrived during the flood, not on wings or in a chariot, but riding upon an ox. The place was called after her, a memory fixed in the earth, a reminder that even in the darkest times, she moved among mortals, not to destroy, but to guide. She did not abandon the world when the waters rose. She rode through the flood to where her voice could still be heard, and those who listened, who followed her words even when they were hidden in riddle, were given back the gift of life. And again, her voice came in later times, when others sought divine favor. In one story, a goddess prepared to swear that the gift of restored youth would never again be granted to mortal men. But the power of prophecy and divine will, shaped in part by the law Themis had first spoken, still moved through the world, whispering of boundaries, of order, of the way things must be. Themis did not shout. She was not fire or storm. She was the steady law beneath all things, the one who held the balance when the sky turned dark, the one who gave shape to miracles not with wonder, but with wisdom. Her guidance had shaped the first race after the flood. Her voice had restored the world. And though the waters had once covered the land, her words had brought life back from stone. In the silence after disaster, it was Themis who remained. In the world rebuilt, it was her truth that stood unshaken. Stopped by Themis, the voice of divine law and the unchanging thread that holds together justice and fate, the course of events in Thebes was no longer simply a matter of mortal desire or ambition, but bound to the deeper will of the cosmos. She spoke clearly of the civil war that had risen within the city, of the clash that had turned brother against brother and twisted the streets of Thebes into places of vengeance and ruin. She said that nothing could bring an end to the chaos except for the might of the High One, and that the fierce warrior who blasphemed even as he scaled the walls would not fall to mortal hand, but would be struck down by the thunder from above. She foretold that the prophet, though still among the living, would be granted the bitter sight of his own ghost as the earth opened beneath his feet, swallowing him into silence. Themis then looked far ahead to what would follow, for she alone among the immortals could see through the haze of time. She told of the son who would rise, not only to honor his father, but to strike down his mother, both an act of love and a terrible crime, and his life would unravel from that moment. He would be tormented by the avengers of blood, by the furies who never sleep, and by the ghost of the woman who bore him. Madness would follow him wherever he fled, until at last he would find a woman whose greed for gold would call forth the old curse again, and the blade of blood would pass from one hand to another. A chain of killings would begin, not just between enemies, but among those joined by kin and memory. Yet even in this, the hand of Themis moved with purpose, not chaos, for she said that the river's daughter would plead on her knees before the king of the sky, asking that her sons be allowed to grow swiftly so they could avenge their father's death. And her voice, pure and grieving, would move the god, so that he would set aside the oath of his own daughter, the goddess of youth, and permit the gift to be given just this once. The boys, still in their early years, would be changed, and in a short time they would become men, strong and swift, ready to repay the wrongs done to their house. But even this mercy would bring unrest among the immortals, for as Themis finished speaking, a murmur began to rise in the heavens. The gods wondered why such gifts should be reserved for some and not all. The balance, once disturbed, always brought with it questions, even among those who dwell above the clouds. In another time, Themis stood again at the center of divine witness. When the mighty storm of battle had passed, and the great monster lay vanquished, the one who shook the heavens returned to the heights of Olympus. There, in full view of all who watched, Themis revealed the torn remains of the defeated one, laying them before the mother who had once borne the giants. She did not speak loudly, for the truth did not need shouting. The sight alone was enough. It was a warning, a silent declaration that even the children of earth born of wrath and stone could not escape the will that ordered the cosmos. The hanging remnants of the Great One were displayed like a banner across the gates of Olympus, a message to all who might rise in rebellion that the law stands above strength, and even the earth herself must bow to what is written in the threads of fate. The name of Themis was not spoken lightly among gods or mortals. Her place among the honored was secure, woven into songs and hymns sung by the muses as they passed under cover of night. They praised the Thunderer, the goddess of the golden sandals, the bright-eyed one, and the archer who walks in the moonlight. But among these, they also sang of the reverent one, Themis, who held the line of justice and stood beside the throne of the Sky Lord, not with weapon or flame, but with truth that did not bend. She was honored alongside the goddess of love and the mother of spring, alongside dawn and the sun and the moon, among the primal forces and the final judges. In one tale, a mortal, unsure of the divine presence that visited his home, guessed at her identity. Could she be the one who brings the hunt, or the one who lights the sky, or the one who guards the law? And in naming Themis, he proved that even among mortals, her name carried weight, enough to stand beside the most radiant of the heavens. She had temples, though not as many as those who brought love or war, but they were quiet places, filled not with incense and dance, but with the still air of order and the silent presence of justice. In the cities of the south, where men walked with pride and argued in the assemblies, Themis had a place. She stood where decisions were made, not with sword or shield, but with balance and measure. In one city, among the crowded streets and the voices of reason and debate, her cult stood not far from the center, a reminder that no matter how clever the tongue or loud the voice, all words must answer to what is right. And so in every time, whether it was the falling of giants, the madness of kings, or the quiet prayer of mortals seeking hope, Themis remained. She was not always seen, nor often called upon in joy, but when the world turned dark and hearts burned with confusion, her voice returned, clear and unwavering. In the end, she did not strike or shout. She simply stood, as she always had, and her presence alone was enough to bend the storm. Towards the great height of the Acropolis, where the sun touches the marble and history whispers through the stones, stood a temple dedicated to Themis, the embodiment of divine law and order, her quiet presence watching over the heart of Athens. Though her name may not have been spoken as often as the thunderous gods of war or love, her role was no less essential, and those who passed through the sacred grounds of the city would have known her image, silent, composed, always watching. Further south, in the sacred grove of Epidaurus, among the trees that healed and the waters that whispered promises of restoration, her presence was honored again. There stood a sanctuary not only to love and to healing, but also to her, the one who binds laws together and ensures that all things follow their rightful course. The racecourse nearby echoed with the feet of men, but within the sanctuary there was calm, for within those boundaries, Themis held her place among the divine. At Olympia, where gods were honored with games and flames burned for ages, her altar stood upon the Gaian, the sacred land of earth, marking the ancient place where Gaia once spoke. And it was told that before the thunder came, before the fire, Earth herself gave her voice through Themis. And so, in that place of strength and contest, an altar was raised on what was called the mouth, where the voice of Earth once rose, and Themis continued her silent guidance. In the land of Tanagra, there were 3 temples, and among them one was dedicated to her. Between the altars of love and music, her image stood, a symbol of balance between desire and order. In Thebes, the city of great myth and sorrow, the road from the Nystan Gate passed 3 sacred places. The first was her sanctuary, where a white marble figure stood, not with weapons or flame, but with the weight of truth. Beside her were the Fates, her daughters, weaving lives into thread, measuring and cutting under her gaze. The third belonged to the god of the marketplace, the one who saw trade and exchange, but even he stood downstream of her judgment. No coin was just if it did not pass beneath her law. At Delphi, where the voice of the gods spoke through vapors and dreams, where seekers came to ask and prophets whispered answers, her role had once been central. Before the golden-haired one took up the seat, she had guided the oracle, her words clear, her meaning deep, her silence more powerful than any riddle. Even after her time had passed, her name lingered in the stones and in the breath of the priestess, who still felt her presence in the sacred cave. In the distant town of Egna, her name was honored as Themis Ichnaia. There, among the hills of Thessaly, her worship took a form tied to the land, to the roots of old tradition, to the sense that justice is not just for cities, but for all who live beneath the sky. Though in some tales she was called by other names or merged with other forces, perhaps Theia, perhaps Nemesis, perhaps a daughter of the sun, here she was held as herself, the one who sees clearly and follows the track of truth. And far in the north, among the oaks and murmuring leaves of Dodona, where the old gods still spoke and mortals listened with awe, there too she had a temple. Beside the shrine of the Thunderer and his consort, among the sacred groves where the wind itself carried messages, her sanctuary stood, its stones cool and strong, a place for those who sought more than power, those who sought justice, those who sought to know what must be done. The rustling leaves whispered not only the future but the unbreakable truth of Themis. In a land further still, in Epirus, a place called Buceta bore her mark. It was said that during the time of the Great Flood, when waters covered the world and the past was washed away, she journeyed there riding upon an ox, guided not by fear but by purpose. That place took its name from that moment, and though time passed and stories grew dim, the tale remained. Perhaps there stood a shrine to her, now lost to stone and root, but not to memory. The ox, the flood, the goddess, they became part of the earth itself. In each of these places, from the shining heights of Athens to the quiet hills of Epirus, Themis was remembered not in loud festivals or wild dances, but in the steady beat of footsteps toward justice, in the stillness of sacred places where laws were not only written but lived. She did not need thunder or war to be heard. Her power was in the silence that followed a question, in the stillness that demanded a decision, in the knowledge that even the gods must follow a law greater than themselves. Her temples were not always the largest, but they were never forgotten. For wherever law was honored and justice upheld, there Themis stood, unmoving, eternal.